The Facebook is playing games with the post I'm posting there in Proof God Exists. You're not seeing all the videos. What they do is there's a little bar up there. There's two little black bars, and you click on it, and you can decide how you want your videos, what order you want them to play in. And I put on the most recent, and then it lines all the videos up as the most recent. But every time I log on there, they switch me to some other lineup, and two of the videos are being hid, and two of them you can see. So look that over in Facebook if you want to see all the videos. Uh, you have to kind of dig around. They're really playing with it, trying to cover them up. Also, I hope you've enjoyed the sharing of the word and the teaching. If you want to continue with this, then let me know. I mean, I've got a lot of stuff. This gets more technical, more maybe eye dropping, sleeping. Some people sleep to it, but it is interesting because, I set out in this Bible study to show what God promised, where God spoke, and what He said, and what had to come to pass. Anytime God speaks, whatever He says has to come to pass. I think one of the most eye-opening and revelations of that is all through the Old Testament, the warning by the prophets, maybe not the warning, but the revelation of the prophets where Christ was coming. In the book of Isaiah, they really explained what happened to Christ in detail and told the future. Well, through the promises, you can also get the future too. And when I share this, what I'm going to be doing is giving you some scriptures as I go along and read this for your references, for you to look up later and to study and to grasp the meaning that I'm saying that the verse is expressing. Because there's so much out there that's not real and true. Some people skip the whole Old Testament and they only think the New Testament is relevant. Some people think that the book of John is the only book you should ever read. But for myself, I have to get into it a little bit deeper than that. I'm not saying I'm perfect at all, but I have a better life because of choices I've made, I think, than I would have had I not made some of the choices. And I think the Bible guided many of those choices for me and led the way for me in my life. But I'll keep putting this out because it's interesting. God said that I'm going to scatter the children of Israel in all four corners of the earth, all across the earth, the desolate places. There are going to be children Israelites scattered everywhere. Then also in Genesis, of course, He promised that there'd be a multitude of people that you couldn't count them, more than the sand on all the seashores in the world, is the offspring of the Israelites. And of course, y'all know there's a difference between an Israelite and a Judah. Judah and Benjamin formed their nation after Solomon, and the 10 tribes formed their nation after Solomon. And then they all went into exile and, captured later and lost their nation. And they became a scattered remnant across the globe. And that's what God said was going to happen, and that's what's happened. And that's why it builds faith, knowing that when God speaks, whatever He says happens. It comes to pass. And we talked a little bit about the Trojans and the throne of David through the descendants of the Trojan line. But now I'm going to talk about the Iberians. Spain used to be called Iberia. There used to be a town there, Zaragoza, where a lot of Zarahites showed up, and y'all know about Zara and Phares. They were brothers. But these people were immigrating into these countries from the Fertile Crescent, or from what I call the Levant. And I'll do a little bit of reading here, talk about a few of these scriptures. In contrast to the Trojans who came to Britain in a body, the next and more numerous arrivals came in a steady stream of immigration that began shortly after the arrival of the Trojans in 1103 BC. That's 1,103 years before Christ, and continued for some 300 years. These newcomers, the Iberians, appear to have settled throughout the British Isles. They appeared in the southwestern Europe in the 15th century BC and gradually migrated through Spain and France into the British Isles. Here they merged with the Trojans to form a basic stock of the ancient British people. Encyclopedia of Religion tells us the Hebrews, or Iberes, of the Caucasus were Georgians. In Sicily, the Iberes were on the west. Spain was Iberia. Tacitus, the Roman historian, speaks of the Iberes in the west of England, Cornwall, who may have come from Spain. We find Iberians, or Hebrews, migrating at least as far as England to settle and establish civilizations. For the same encyclopedia, in a different article, tells us the so-called Iberians, supposed to be a Mediterranean race, are also traceable in England. Long boroughs, according to Dr. Isaac Taylor. Who were the Iberians? Let us examine the word Iberian, or as the ancient wrote it, Iberi. It is but one form of the name that also appears in early times as Iberia, Iboru, Iborucum, Hibernia, Hybridge. Without these variant suffixes, which are additional meanings, land of or people of, the name appears as Aber, Ibri, Ibor, Iber, or Ibra, thus being identified with Eber, the root of the Hebrews, the racial name of the Israel people. This in itself indicates that the Iberians were Hebrew and the Israelites. An examination of the various forms of the word Iberia show that it is also spelled Ebe or Heb, and is the ending ins. Simply means people or the people of. We see that the Iberians were the people of Eber or Heber. The Israelites too were people of Eber or Heber, Hebrews. Because of these descendants of Eber, spelled in the New Testament, Heber, in Luke chapter 3, verse 35, By the name they bore, it is evident that our Iberian ancestors were Hebrew or Israelites. And that's in Luke 3, verse 35. He became a patriarch, and that's where the word Hebrew came from. It's his clan, and many of the children after that were named Heber. Heber was a famous name. According to McClintock and Strong's Encyclopedia, the patriarch Heber was the founder of the Hebrew race, indicating that the word Hebrew means a descendant of the patriarch Heber. This evidence is supposed by an article in Biblical Archaeology. Is one place it can be shown. I hope I'm not boring you out there with all this knowledge. Hebrew is an ethnicon like Amorite. That's found in Genesis 14, verse 13. An ethnicon is a family, tribal, or racial designation, and his referenced verse in Genesis speaks of Abraham the Hebrew. In other words, Ibri, Eber, Heber are all variations of the name of the Hebrew patriarch and his descendants. The name Hebrew also on the added meaning of an immigrant or colonist because of the colonization spirit of the people. McClintock and Strong's Encyclopedia adds that the name Hebrew came to mean one of the other side, immigrant. Bible translator Farron Fenton pointed out that in 1 Samuel 4, verse 6, Iberim is translated means colonist, a fit term to be used by the Philistines and the Israelites who were really colonists in Palestine. The Bible affirms the colonization spirit of the Hebrews in Genesis 49, verse 13. Prophesied that the Israelites, like the tribe of Zebulun, shall dwell in the haven of the sea, and he shall be as an haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon, which was leading coastal port city on the Mediterranean. Similarly, Judges 5, verse 17 asks, and why did Dan remain in his ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. Breeches. Sounds like some pants or something. Your breeches. Well, the word breeches literally means creek or rivers. So the tribe of Asher spent a considerable part of their time in sailing excursions. Many prophecies speak of Hebrew expansion along the sea routes. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path is in the great waters. That's in Psalm 77, verse 19. I will set his hand on the sea and his right hand in the rivers. That's Psalms 89, verse 25. You know, in the southeast corner of England, they have over 14 rivers that come into the country. He shall have dominion from sea to sea. Psalm 72, verse 8. His seed shall be in many waters. That's Numbers 24, verse 7. The Universal Jewish Encyclopedia states, in the time of Solomon, Phoenicians, accompanied by Hebrews, reached as far as England. This was during Solomon's reign. England was therefore known as the Israelites, and many may have sought a refuge there after the fall of their kingdom by the Assyrians. So many could have escaped back then in 721 BC. How wonderful have these promises of sea migration and colonization been fulfilled. One of the greatest Celtic scholars was Dr. John Ryans. In his book, Celtic Britain, he states Ireland was known as Iberian, their etymology ancestors. Etymology. Can't say that word tonight. And the various names that they Iberian, Iberon, or Royan. The other ones were Ibir, Ymer, Yber. So they were sailing around the islands way back there, starting around 1103 BC, up till the captivity, and then even after that. Rhines also discusses early Celtic names and suggests that we compare Semitic names, compare the Hebrew. The Hebrew origin of the Iberians is thus well supported in both scripture and history. So historians have found them, and also the Bible speaks of them. And that's why I gave those scriptures. The next tribe I'm going to talk about is the tribe of Dan. Until next time. I put two of these together, so keep listening to part 2 of this message. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some stuff tonight. There's been a misunderstanding about what this Bible study is about. You know, if anything, I'm a history buff. I like history. I like to study history. I like to see what happened in the past, how people got through the past with the history they had. But, you know, there's also a narrative in the Bible that I'm trying to study and open for people to understand. You know, I don't believe since Jesus died on the cross that we need a government made up by a king. But you got to realize what happened to society over the years and why we had kings. You know, it was a theocracy ruled by God through the Old Testament until King David. The people cried for a king, and Saul came up. He was not God's chosen man, but he let them have that king because that's what they wanted. They wanted to be like the other nations. So those other nations had kings. This Bible study is not just about kings. You know, it's about the performance of the Word, performance of the Bible. That's what I'm trying to explain is where did God speak? And when he did speak, what he spoke, did it come to pass? That's what this Bible study is all about. It's not about whether we should have kings or not kings, or Jesus is ruling today on earth or not ruling today on earth? There's a bunch of questions about that. And I'm trying to explain what history happened and why God performed His word or performed what He said in the Bible. And, that's the point that I'm trying to make in the Bible study. But people put labels on it and say, well, he believes in kings, and he believes in this, and he believes in that. Well, I believe what I've learned in the Word, in the Bible. That's why I talked about the Trojans, the history of the Trojans. You can study that for 2 or 3 years and try to get all the understanding of where they came from and how they got there. But there were several invasions from from the Levant to Europe, to England, to Ireland. And it's good if we know where all that is. We know where we came from because we all came from the same melting pot. Most of us came from Great Britain, Ireland, or Spain, or Western Europe, the Caucasus Mountains. That's something I'm fixing to speak about in just a minute. I'm going to read a little bit tonight. But for people just to take this teaching and say, well, it doesn't matter. There's the church and the church age, and that's all that matters. Well, yeah, that's all that matters when you look at it simply like that. But also, if you dig into the Bible, you'll learn that God made certain promises. One big promise He made was that King David's throne would go on forever and that he would never lack a male heir on that throne. That throne would be useful all the way until Jesus comes. And that's another thing. Is what form of government should we have had up until the second return of Jesus for the rapture, not for the second return, for the city that comes down from heaven, but for the rapture. What form of government were we supposed to have? And we've tested many things. Great Britain still has a monarch and a king that sits on the throne. The United States has a president. We have no king. We look at the individual. But when you really look at a king or what a king is, or the duties of a king, there are many things that kings do. For example, one big word, entrepreneur. A king holds some independence from the government. It's not like a communist country where you have the government owns all the enterprise, owns the car building factories, owns all the drug companies, owns everything. And people that run it for the government get a little pension each week. That's communism. And entrepreneurship and capitalism is totally opposite. You excel by merit. In other words, if you apply yourself at college or in a career or wherever you find yourself, if If you're building cars, then build the best cars and the most cars you can. And be an entrepreneur. The government doesn't have ownership of your business. You own it yourself. You're the king of that business. So entrepreneurs are several kings. They're detached from the government in the aspect of economy. And that's the point that I'm making. What form of government works best? If Jesus came back today, this would be a good thing to answer. No one talks in this group very much because it's private, and some people send out these videos, a few people, but what form of government do you think Jesus should bring with him? Of course, we know it's going to be a monarch, but how is he going to rule and administer that monarch? That's the question. Is he going to appoint a president and let the president oversee everything? Is he going to, I thought about it a lot. I mean, evidently there's a problem with the government. There's a problem with the government because when he comes back during the rapture, and then after 7 years, when he comes back on the second coming, the government is going to be upon his shoulder. That's what the Bible says. That's a promise. The Bible has eternally promised that when Jesus comes back, that the government will be upon his shoulder in the second advent. A lot of people don't know about that. A lot of people don't care about that. But, if you're in this Bible study, I explain that because that's where we've gone wrong. Tremendously gone wrong. I mean, the United States government is trying to decide on how to spend billions and billions and billions of dollars in foreign countries. But that's the question, is what kind of government will Jesus bring with him when he comes back after the 7-year tribulation period of the rapture? There are people out there that understand what I'm talking about. And there are people out there that don't understand.
Was dead, cold in my chest, a stone in my flesh. But grace has a voice that reaches the meek, it leans for the lowly. And all that I was, the scarlet and dust under the flood, the power of the curse coming undone under the blood. And I'm born again, I'm born again, I'm born again, eyes. Oh, my bones are full of fire, my spirit is alive. Oh, my heart is full of light, your goodness fills my eyes. My bones are full of fire, my spirit is alive. My heart is full of light, your goodness fills my eyes. My bones are breathing fire. Oh, I'm born again. 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 I'm born There is no river that runs wide as your goodness. There is no mountain that stands tall as your faithfulness. There is no river that runs wide as your goodness. There is no mountain that stands tall as your faithfulness. And there's nothing else I'll ever need. All of my days your mercy follow me. There is nothing else I'll ever need. All of my days your mercy follow me. Father, you never delay in keeping a promise. There is no wonderful thing that you have withheld from us. Father, you never delay in keeping a promise. There is no wonderful one time have you forsaken me. No, never once. Oh, and the years have left no trace upon your unfailing love. Not one time have you forsaken me. No, never once. There is nothing else I'll ever need. All of my days, your mercy followed me. There is nothing else I'll ever need. All of my days, you